Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to News Dose, and we have a few interesting leaks to talk about today. As a lot of us are aware, one of the more frustrating mysteries this generation has been in regards to PlayStation's first-party lineup. I mean, you talk about going from glory to where the heck are you? That's been PlayStation Studios this generation. They've mostly been MIA these past couple years, in large part because of Sony's forced shift to live service, which, I warned them that was a bad idea, albeit I had some naysayers in the comments. But hey, nonetheless, we'll ignore that because it sounds like Sony has at the very least been preparing a secret game from one of their most exciting studios. So we're going to get into all of that, as well as Xbox's new handheld, which is certainly shocking some people, but I don't really think that it should be, which I'm going to explain why. First, though, I do want to thank my supporters on Patreon and on YouTube memberships. Thank you just so much for what you do, and you will receive this video through early access. Let's just go get right into things, though, and just speaking of topics that really shouldn't surprise people, albeit it is Nintendo's official comparison of what Donkey Kong Bananza looked like before they turned it into a Switch 2 exclusive. They shared this image on their website, which I don't really know what possessed them to share this information, because there are people out there that are going to run with this story in a negative way, predictably, which is exactly what's happening here. You know, the idea that Donkey Kong Bonanza is only an upgraded Switch 1 game, which I'm going to go and point out that debatably the best Switch 1 game originally started development on the Wii U, being Zelda Breath of the Wild, and for that matter, the Switch's best-selling game was also a Wii U title, being Mario Kart 8. So the idea that this is somehow bad, I just disagree with. Early generation games do often start development on the prior console. Now, as for the other accusation that I've been seeing thrown around is that Nintendo is being greedy because they could have released Bananza for the Switch 1, which, who knows, maybe they could have. But I'm also going to point out that we have no idea how this game was performing on the Switch 1. There's already reports that its performance isn't 100% perfect on the Switch 2 as is, so chances are it may have struggled even more so on the Switch 1. So we really don't know, but that's also the reason that I don't really like to just assume things without reason. So what I prefer to do is to focus on the positive, and in this case, Donkey Kong Bonanza obviously received a night and day improvement in terms of its overall presentation. Now, we also got some new information about this year's Call of Duty. Even under Microsoft, we're still very much under that yearly Call of Duty schedule, as was confirmed back at their Xbox showcase. And if you're excited to see more, well, then Jeff Keighley just confirmed that Black Ops 7 will get a worldwide reveal at Gamescom opening night live in a quote-unquote massive way on August 19th. So my guess here is that we'll get a lengthy gameplay reveal, probably for its single player. A lot of times, Activision prefers to reveal its multiplayer separately, but we'll likely get our first look at a single player and a release date. I mean, Call of Duty very much operates on a pattern, and it tends to be a series that you can mostly peg into November or sometimes October, so I don't know if they can reveal too much that's going to just shock us, but if you are a fan of the series, then you might want to tune in to Gamescom. Okay, so let's go and talk about a remake that I find to be a little bit surprising because this just kind of came out of nowhere. So let's take a look at this claim. It comes from MP First, and they said that they've learned that Square Enix is currently developing a remake of Dragon Quest VII, Fragments of the Forgotten Past, the beloved 2000 classic, originally released for the first PlayStation. This information comes from internal documents we've seen that outline several upcoming projects tied to the publisher's top franchises, all scheduled for this fiscal year or early next year. Now, they seem to be convinced that this is a remake rather than an HD 2D game like Dragon Quest III, which, if their information is correct, then I think they could be right, but with an asterisk. And let me just go ahead and explain. Some people might not realize this, but Dragon Quest VII already has a remake on the 3DS. That's the footage that I'm using on screen. And when I first heard this news, I thought it was a little strange because why 7 specifically? I mean, you would think that Dragon Quest VIII, as one such example, would be the better choice because it's more beloved, and it would probably draw in a lot more fans with a big-time remake. However, I then realized that Square Enix already remastered a 3DS game for the Switch 2, being Bravely Default. So it seems like they could be revisiting their 3D library, and that almost makes me wonder if they're going to do the same thing for Dragon Quest VII, the 3DS remake. I mean, maybe it's a completely new remake. I'm not going to rule that out, but I just don't know how much sense that actually makes, given that they've already remade it once. But who knows? It's really hard to tell with Square Enix sometimes, but I guess we'll see soon enough. Okay, so let's go and move on to this secret PlayStation game, and this is from the Sony Santa Monica, which obviously is most well known for God of War. Yeah, that might perk up some ears because in some ways you could argue that Kratos is PlayStation's mascot. It's a long beloved series for the PlayStation brand, and out of all of the God of War games, God of War 2018 might be the most celebrated. Now, depending if you prefer the original trilogy, you may feel differently about which is the best God of War, but there's no doubt that the 2018 reboot is a great game. And the reason I say all this, to preface this topic, is because it was directed by Cory Barlog. Ragnarok was actually handled by somebody else, which personally, I don't really feel like Ragnarok was as good as God of War 2018. That's just my opinion. It's still a great game. But the reason that Ragnarok was handled by somebody else is because Cory Barlog has been chipping away at a brand new game that has yet to be revealed. However, we now have some new information about this secret project of his, and it might not be what a lot of us were maybe expecting. Previously, it was believed to be a new IP with some sci-fi elements. But according to Jason Schreier, that might not be true after all. On Resetera, he claimed that Cory Barlog's game is Sony Santa Monica's next big thing. Last time I spoke to anyone about it a month or two ago, it was going well. Which, okay, that's nice to hear. But here's where things start to get really interesting, because he later on said, why does everybody think Barlog's game is a new IP? So now everybody is going absolutely crazy about what this game could possibly be, and a lot of people were theorizing that it could maybe be a licensed game. I mean, Sony has been doing great with the Spider-Man series, and they're now working on Marvel Tokon as well. Cory has also talked about a Mandalorian game in the past, so I mean, there's some logic that he could be working on a licensed game, but no, apparently that's not it either. Jason Schreier suggests that it's not a licensed IP. So if it's not a licensed game, well, Sony Santa Monica has only really worked on one other game, being Kinetica, which I highly doubt that's what he's working on. So if I were to guess, it'll be God of War related, but it'll also be completely different than what we've ever seen before. I mean, the only other thing that I can think of here is that he's maybe working on an entirely different PlayStation franchise that Santa Monica isn't linked to. But either way, it sounds like whatever he's working on, it's going to be a big surprise for fans when it eventually gets announced. Now, one last thing before we go, some more information about the Xbox ROG Ally leaked a bit early. This comes directly from the Asus website, which, that adds some credence to this rumor, but you should still take this information with some skepticism, which I'm going to explain that here in just a moment. What's happening here, though, is that its price was listed at 600 euros for the base model and 900 euros for the premium upgraded model, which that actually sounds about right. If my information is correct, depending on where you're located at in Europe, the ROG Ally X is listed at 900 euros. So, considering the Xbox ROG Ally X is essentially the same thing with a few tweaks, yeah, 900 euros sounds about right. At the same time, a lot of people are currently trying to translate what this would be in the United States. And technically, if you look at the exchange rates, it could come out close to $1,000. That's, however, where I'm going to go ahead and pump the brakes, though, because technology isn't always priced the same in every single region based off of exchange rates alone. So from my perspective, if the Xbox ROG Ally X is priced similar to the regular ROG Ally X in Europe, then my guess here is that we would see a similar thing in the United States as well, which would be about $900 or $650, depending on which model you want. Now, even still, there does seem to be some sticker shock for these prices, but honestly, I feel like this is within the ballpark of what I expected. Again, the Xbox ROG Ally is essentially a ROG Ally, but with a few tweaks. And also, PC gaming handhelds do tend to be expensive. However, if they do go above $1,000, as some people are speculating, that's when I'll come back on here and say, yeah, that's a little bit more surprising. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode. But until next time, make sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and peace out.